Welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Mary Elizabeth Williams. It is one of the most buzzed about movies of the year, and with good reason. I just saw it last night. It's amazing. Based on Gerard Conley's best-selling memoir, Boy Erased, tells the story of what happened when a teenage son of a Baptist minister in the South was sent for gay conversion therapy. The film's screenwriter, director, co-producer, and co-star Joel Edgerton is with us today. You know him from a little something called the Star Wars franchise, Warrior, It Comes at Night, Loving, which is a beautiful film, Animal Kingdom, The Gift, which you also directed, and Red Sparrow, and also you are our second Charlie from Kinky Boots that we've had here.
No way.
Yes, you're our second Charlie.
Wow.
So welcome, Charlie.
Thank
Hi.
you. Thank you.
Joel, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get right into this, because I am still shaken by this movie, even knowing the story. It's such a tense, suspenseful, intense experience. Going on this journey with Gerard, the character of Gerard in the film. I have heard that Gerard Conley said that you were obsessed with his story.
Yeah, it's the easiest way of describing why I got involved. I read his book. I became immediately grabbed by what I'd read. I'd heard a little bit about conversion therapy, and I'd had my own fascination with institutions growing up, like a big fear of them. And I guess that's what led me to the book. And then when I read it, it just really emotionally grabbed me, and I found myself thinking about it daily. I started doing things on a regular daily basis towards pushing the movie, the idea of turning it into a movie, meeting Gerard, meeting with survivors of conversion therapy. And then I just found myself thinking, well, no one else is making this movie. No one else, in a year that the book had been on the shelves, no one was really beating his door down. And so I thought I would get creatively involved as well. Started writing a screenplay.
And here we are. And for a film, for a story, and now you know this world. You know that this is not exaggerated at all, the things that happen in this movie. You know that there is violence, that there is psychological abuse, that there is straight up ignorance. And yet you have said, this is not a film where you want people to see anyone as a villain.
Well, I mean, in many ways, Gerard's story in the broad spectrum of conversion therapy, or under the topic of conversion therapy, is some would say understated. Given that I saw a 2020 expose on conversion therapy, close to being into pre-production for the film, there are places that I'm shocked that parents would drive up and say, this looks like an okay place to leave my child, like barbed wire on the top of fences, and staff that admit that they're willing to beat the kids, and there are locked rooms like solitary confinement, and torturous practices like electric shock therapy. So some parents are so disconnected the moment they find out their child identifies as gay that love is almost withdrawn, because how could you do that? How could you send your child there? Gerard's parents, I think, and why I thought his story was worth telling is because ultimately there's a really positive message there in two parents who have acknowledged in their own different ways that it doesn't work, that it was a mistake. They sent him there because they loved him. They thought they were trying to help him get back to his community in a way that he wouldn't be persecuted. And you know, that aspect of we really want to help you is the complicated part of it, because nobody really was a villain, I don't think. I don't think his dad was saying, I don't love you anymore and get out of my house. He was saying, I want you to really, really consider that it will be hard for you to live in this community and to live in this house if you don't try and change, because we believe change is possible. And it came from, I hate to say this, but it came from a place of care and love. Therapists weren't just profiteering, waving parents off at the gate and going, see you later, and then twirling their mustaches, beating kids. And now, like I say, places like Jonah, which was taken down, a facility that really just preyed on children, was out and out about abuse. Love in Action really purported to have an 84% success rate. I think they did this, like plucked it out of the air, a statistic like that. But yeah, so we wanted to render the film in the same way Garrett had, with an empathetic point of view to everybody, so that you can watch the film, you can make your own mind up, and I challenge anybody to watch the film and not come out of it thinking that I've made a 1-800, commercial for on behalf of conversion therapy.
Right, but and you've also said this is not a movie that throws religion under the bus. This is a film that really has characters trying to figure this out and trying to reconcile. I love my child, and what would be the worst thing would be if my child were condemned to hell, if my child were ostracized from God's love. That's where they're coming from.
I respect all religion. I respect all different people's points of views, their belief systems, the way they view the world, and who they worship and what they worship. I have an opinion against anybody who's using that as an agenda towards damage, whether it's war or in this case, exclusion or the walking back of freedoms of individuals. So, I actually have a really deep admiration and envy for anybody who has deep faith in their life. I think it's an incredible comfort to any individual to know that they have a belief in something bigger than ourselves. And for some religions, that also is about a belief after death, where we go and how we are looked after. And I have an envy for that. So this film is very respectful towards religion. I didn't want, because it's not real. There's an article that we've rendered in the film as if it's written by Garrett, because he is a journalist and he is an author. And it starts by saying, if God only knew. And it was sort of my way of saying, I wonder what God or Jesus would think if this was going on, because really it's people creating these institutions based on their interpretation of the Bible, and that's an agenda that is decided on earth based on the feeling of how God feels about people who have same-sex attraction. It really needs to be examined, and in my belief, it needs to be dismantled.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's not child abuse.
I'm talking very kindly, obviously.
Child abuse, not a good idea. You're being very respectful.
Yeah, probably
here.
not a good idea. There's a really interesting debate about whether or not conversion therapy should exist at all for anybody who has free choice. Trouble is, guys like Garrett were 19, and you could say, all right, he's emancipated, he has the right to make a decision for himself, but at a young age, even into your early 20s, sometimes we're still trapped by our limitation of understanding of the world. The idea of cutting all ties and moving to another place is a terrifying thing. So we may as well still be 16 in those moments. Our parents are our guides to life, and if they tell us we're broken, I think it's very damaging. So, but say I'm 44, if I decided for some reason I wanted to go to conversion therapy, there's an interesting debate there as to whether or not, I shouldn't tell anybody else how to live their life, how they should think. But in this case, I stand on the side of protecting children and being in a position or advocacy to say, let's stop conversion therapy, because you've got children terrified of being kind of shipped off to a place that really doesn't work, and it is abuse. And
Joel, you have previously directed a thriller, and there were so many elements of this film that really reminded me of that. You clearly have an eye for suspense and for building great tension, and that is a strong element of this, because this is, I don't think you can tell a story like this unless you're really interrogating these ideas of the manipulation of these people's minds, and the manipulation that goes into, whether it is fully intentional or not, of these kids, so that they are deprived and then they want to be brought back into the fold, that they have love taken away from, they have things taken away from them, so that then when a little something is given back to them, it feels like the light of the sun on them again for the first time. And that's what this kind of therapy really does. And your character is the master manipulator of all of this. And he's based on a real person. So how did you lean into playing your character?
Well, in terms of taking an empathetic, even-handed approach to making the movie, it was important that I meet everybody. I mean, I spent time with Garrett's parents. I met Dr. Julie, who Cherry Jones's character plays, the real kind of singular voice of reason in the movie. And I went on a journey to Texas. A journey, it sounds like sounds like
did it on a horse?
Old school journey, yeah. Like I packed my donkey up and I went to Texas. I went on an aeroplane and went to Texas, and I sat down with John Schmidt, who is the man my character's based on. He was a kind of a distant consultant on the film. If we needed information, he's now turned his back on conversion therapy, and you can look at clips he's spoken out. He's been outspoken online. Still, like many people, it's important to acknowledge that he still has faith in his life, and he's open and out as a gay man, and that you don't just have to abandon God if you want to, lead a life of living with or being married to somebody of the same sex. And John represents that now, and he also represents one of the people who's speaking out against therapy.
And you have that moment in the film where a character talks about that we can touch and we won't be burned, the skies won't open up.
Yeah, I promise you God won't strike you down.
Yeah.
The thing about John that's interesting to me is that he deep down, I think, knew that the therapy wasn't working. He also acknowledged to me that in his 25 years of starting as a client, meaning he was there to be administered to, the therapy he was there to try and be saved himself. As he progressed up the ranks of Love in Action, it was a way of reminding himself that he was staying in the program, that he was, that it was working. He then was responsible for changing the therapy. So because it's not a sanctioned practice as well, different pockets of therapy places, or conversion therapy as it's called, operate in different ways. They cherry pick from Freud, and they, in the case of Love in Action, it was a combination of a bit of Freudian, sins of the parents trickle down to the children, causing your sexuality to change in a way that was sinful. And the 12-step program was very much an appropriated thing. The idea of giving you moral inventory, instead of saying, hey, I'm Joel Edgerton and I'm an alcoholic and these are all the bad things I did while I was drunk. Love in Action's moral inventory was, these are all the bad things I did in sexual ways with people of the same sex. Exposing sins, So John knew, not only did he know that they weren't working, and as they weren't working, he was shifting the program. Like, well, that's not working. Let's try some new stuff. He was just, I hate to say it, but he was making it up as he went along. And knowing all the while it wasn't even working for himself, I find that very interesting, and I found that interesting to play. And it's also important to acknowledge that you have people calling themselves therapists and doctors who really don't have the right or the qualification to do that. And that is a key, one of the keys to what I think is very shammy about it.
The self-appointed expertise.
Yes.
That's not just in religion. We find that everywhere. One of the things I thought was so interesting when you talk about this, and you talk about the 12-step aspect of it, and there's Flea's incredibly fascinating, dangerous, scary character. This is a film that I feel is so important at this moment because it is a film that looks at the effects of, for want of a better phrase, toxic masculinity, macho culture, and the way that it hurts boys and men.
Yeah.
And there's so much conversation right now
And
about
girls.
about how it hurts girls and women. We've had plenty of that, and more, please, more. But to really look at the way that this hypermasculinity hurts boys and men, to look at a movie that is showing real events of, well, if you just play football, or if you play baseball, or we can teach you some sports, then we can baseball the gay out of you, basically. That equating femininity with weakness. Equating femininity with homosexuality, which are not parallel at all. And it feels like that's a really important thing to be talking about right now. And I'm sure that you and your brother, who is a stuntman, was the stunt coordinator on this film, have, in your 20 years now in acting, had some experiences with macho culture and hyper masculine culture in your industry. Did that influence you?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's interesting. As a young male actor, I identified with tough guy actors. You know, when I was a film watcher only, like I just loved movies. It was always about. I grew up in the '80s, and it was all, you know, the bigger your muscles, the bigger the movie star you were. You know, Arnold and Sylvester, and later on, it's interesting watching that. You know, how masculinity is depicted on screen in different ways. You know, it goes through these tough guy phases, and then it goes through, you know, thoughtful and sensitive phases. And I think the best male actors are actors who have a certain gravitas to them or masculinity to them, and it's not a necessary ingredient. But guys like Russell, for example. He's such a man in one regard, and yet he has such an emotional access and such a sensitivity to him. And I think one of the myths about masculinity is that you're not allowed to show your sensitivity. It's a big problem, I know. You know, I guess there's this sort of stereotype of the silent father, of the father that doesn't express his emotions, and it's weird as a young man. I remember identifying, I saw that as strength. This is like, that strength was silence and stoicism and, you know, only speaking when it was necessary, not talking about emotion. And that weakness was the opposite. Weakness was being open and verbose about feelings, was having an essay of words to describe what was going on for you internally. And I realised at too late an age that those definitions should be flipped, that strength should be expression, and that weakness should be limiting one's expression. And I think that Garrett's mother, I mean, to tie it back to the film, she is that strength. She is somebody who was able to tune in internally to what was going on with her, get in touch with her instincts in a way, and said, I'm no longer going to be pushed around by the masculine ideas in my neighbourhood, under my roof, or in the community. And she faces this wall of opinion, this wall of judgment, and her own kind of persecution. But her weapon is love, and her weapon is expression of truth. So it kind of goes to show you that in itself, that sensitivity, whether it lives in a man or a woman, I think is strength. And I think masculinity is often the mathematical equation in young men is that masculinity equals strength, and that's a man thing. And I think it's an equation that doesn't add up. That's my opinion. It's a very long and complicated subject to talk about, and everybody has their opinion. But you know, I think being able to express yourself is a strength, and that should be masculinity should be defined in other ways, I think.
100%. So you are doing all of that. You are expressing yourself on all different kinds of burners. You have had a production company for what, almost over 20 years now? You've been, like, you're no new kid on the block. You have been producing and writing and with your brother and your production company all this time. You've been working on that, and you're trying to change. It sounds like with the projects you're doing, you're really trying to change the conversation in your own way with the sorts of projects you're taking on, including your next one.
Yeah, I mean, you know, The Gift was my way of putting myself on the map as a filmmaker, and I knew and not to think that you should think about your first film in terms of the opportunity to make a second film, but I thought if I had one shot at making a movie that was going to give me the chance to do it again, I'd want to do something that couldn't be just small and forgotten about. And so I was very kind of a little bit of business oriented towards that, do a genre experience. But The Gift very much had another subject very, very dear to my heart of bullying and exploring that as a theme. And this was just something, I wasn't trying to find an important movie to make. I knew I wanted to put something positive out into the world, and I knew I wanted to work with actors in more of a dramatic movie, a drama. And when I read Garrett's book, I realized in hindsight, once I became obsessed, that it checked those two boxes. Because for all of the despair you go through, or characters go through, for all the chaos and confusion, ultimately that story, his story, has a positive outcome, or the potential to help other people in a positive way.
Absolutely. And now it's out in the world, and we can continue the conversation and maybe actually work to move that needle on gay conversion therapy, which is still a huge issue in the U.S. and in Australia, where it is on the rise. Joel, thank you so much for coming in. It is such a beautiful, moving, scary, intense experience to watch this film, and it's going to spark a lot of conversations. The movie is called Boy Erased. It's a pleasure to have you, and thank you for keeping your countrymen so well employed in the acting. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.